This camera cost me £30 from AliExpress. And on paper, she packs a hell of a punch for this price. The unbranded powerhouse, which we will coin as the Beast, boasts a 24 megapixel COMS sensor, which is only one letter away from a CMOS. But she has twice the resolution as my camera, a 3-inch LCD screen, powerful 18x zoom, and can shoot full HD video. When you look closely at the front, you'll also see that it has night vision capabilities. So, did I make a gargantuan mistake buying my camera for £4,000? Let's see. It comes in this unassuming box, embellished by its legendary technical specifications. It shoots JPEG, so no RAW photos, unfortunately. It also seems to have changed its tune to 720p now, but that's still HD. It's even got face detect. Look, she weighs 288 grams, so when you're using her as a workhorse, you'll be able to go all day. When opening the box, you're greeted with His Majesty the Beast. Included is this AV cable. Long live AV, and a micro USB cable. It also comes with this surprisingly nice bag. The camera itself doesn't look all that bad, to be fair. Unsurprisingly, the plastics aren't particularly inspiring, but she does hold together. It's got DVC on the handle, which, if you don't know, stands for Double Verified Cinematographer. It's got a wide and telephoto toggle, a micro SD card slot. The buttonology on this camera, buttonology is a word and I'm coining it, is quite good. They're logically placed, they're easy to use. The interior has this mean looking carbon fiber aesthetic, proving its status not as a supercar, but as a super camera. Bosh. Unfortunately, the LCD screen doesn't rotate. The menu system is simple and easy to understand for a beginner, just like it was in the 90s. The viewing angles on this screen definitely leave a lot to be desired, but that's okay. It's a workaround that can happen. So, after going through the menus, I set her to 1080p and we got testing. Okay, this is the first shot I'm going to have taken with this camera. We're recording! So, look at that. We can punch all the way in. I just want to stop here and say that the zoom function is actually just fake news. It's not actually doing anything, which is pretty hilarious. I'll be honest, I was expecting an image stabilizer, but you don't need one, not really, especially when you've got this beautiful grip. Audio test, 1, 2, 1, 2. I've taken some comparison shots with my camera, my workhorse, the Sony a7S III. She retails for about £3,500 now. Attached is the love of my life, the 35mm f1.8 from Sony, which is about 400 quid. So all in all, this setup is costing about £4,000. It's worth noting that at this point, this camera does just spontaneously shut down whenever it wants, and unfortunately, when that happens, the file does corrupt. Also, on the LCD, what you're seeing is a sort of squished version of the actual image that's being recorded. I was concerned that that's how the image would come out, but my working theory is that it's doing that in order to do the fake zoom. Anyway, between these two cameras, you can see that 1080p is a little bit of a stretch. But this isn't a surprise, and it's not just the Beast that's guilty of this. Many camera companies will claim resolution because technically the video is that resolution, but as you can see, there is a radical difference between the same resolutions. For example, my camera is shooting a 4K image which is being downsized and squeezed into a 1080p image, so you're getting a significantly sharper resolution just from that, even though it's technically 1080p. Unlike what my Sony's doing, I think this camera is doing the opposite. I think realistically it's recording a 480p image, potentially 720p, and then it's upscaling that internally, which of course doesn't mean it is actually that. I have now cropped in 500% on my 1080p image, and you'll notice that we're still getting a significantly nicer looking image, even though technically the resolution is something along the lines of 360p. I'm also shooting in log on my camera, which is recording quite a flat image, but that's going to enable me to add the color and the exposure in after the fact, really maximizing the dynamic range of my sensor. This is a feature that of course you're not going to get on the Beast. In fact, you won't be able to choose color profiles, and you certainly won't even be able to choose the exposure. As you can see, the Beast exhibits quite a bit of noise. It's not necessarily the sharpest thing in the world. It has quite an aggressive purple color cast. When we look into the eyes and the eyelashes and the hair, this camera is incredibly compressed. It's basically doing what YouTube does to videos, but internally, so it can actually record this information, because the processor isn't very powerful. Another downside with the Beast's sensor is the rolling shutter, which is just the speed in which the sensor can read the image that's being recorded. One of the great things about this Sony camera is it has a very fast readout, so we're getting much less of that jello effect when we're moving the camera quickly. But I think the main thing that you're seeing here comes down to the dynamic range of the Beast. The sensor on my Sony has a usable dynamic range of about 13 stops, which is very high even by modern standards. Dynamic range is simply just the range of exposure a sensor can handle in a given shot. Our eyes, for example, are very good at seeing a lot of details in dark areas and being able to make out what's happening in the highlights, in the bright parts of the image. And that's why even cropped in at this amount, we're still getting a much nicer, more natural look. As well as the fact that the 1080p is radically sharper, we're getting quite a natural looking image on the face. Whereas the Beast is exhibiting some of that cheaper looking footage. It's also digitally over sharpened, which is adding to that cheap look. As I point at this computer, and we'll ignore the auto exposure for now, notice how once it exposes for the screen, it is struggling to see anything other than that. When you do something like a portrait shot, you really begin to see how that dynamic range is affecting the image. We're getting a very natural gradient of light across her face, which is more in lieu of how we would see. One of the main reasons that the high-end cinema cameras, which cost upwards of £50,000, cost so much is because they are the best at doing this. Unless the film is using heavy CGI, you'll find that resolution and specifications like that, even low-light performance, are among the least valued reasons for buying these cameras. It's all about reproducing that natural look, which unfortunately the Beast doesn't do quite well. I then cranked the ISO up on my camera, which is going to do two things. It's going to introduce a much higher level of noise to the image, but it's also going to decrease the dynamic range just to show you what I'm talking about. As you can see with these images, now we're starting to look more like each other. Of course, they don't look dead on, but you're seeing how those things are really affecting the image from the Beast. There are no variable frame rate options on the Beast, so you are stuck in real-time video, which is recording at 30 frames per second. One of the cool features of my camera is that it can shoot in slow motion. So even when you're shooting handheld, you can go into slow motion and you can do parallaxes and movements like this, which is going to make your footage potentially look more interesting. Attempting to do this on the Beast is going to be difficult without that stabilizer as well. To be honest, I was expecting a stabilizer in there, but it's not the worst thing in the world. I then decided to test the old night vision capabilities. And at first I was thinking, my god, this really isn't the best thing in the world. But then I realized this isn't noise that we're seeing here. This thing is seeing different frequencies, different energies. And if you look closely, you can actually see your future. What was happening here is that the noise would freeze on the recording, which it wasn't showing on the camera. That is a weird and interesting thing that I haven't quite come across before, but I guess if you're outside, it wouldn't be too much of a problem. As you can see here, the auto exposure is very slow and very confused a lot of the time, and without any manual controls, this is definitely a big drawback. You also cannot view any of the footage you filmed in the Beast, which is yet again another downside, but 30 quid. Once I was done, I plugged the SD card into my computer, which it did not like. Eventually, it dawned on me that this thing is probably formatting the card for PCs. So I busted out my girlfriend's ancient PC, and sure enough, she was good. But then I found out that the codecs for these clips are in AVI. AVI sucks, it doesn't work on any modern computer, and you're gonna have to transcode that footage to MP4 or a modern format. Anyway, there you go. Conclusions. You know, I wanted to celebrate this device because for 30 quid it could be a tool for a child or someone to get into filmmaking, which is always a good thing. But all things considered, I have to say this thing is and I actually think is a bit of a rip-off for 30 quid. Everything about it is 20 years old in terms of technology, which in some sense is expected. It is very cheap, so you're obviously not going to be getting modern features. But the elephant in the room is two things. Firstly, you could just buy an old camcorder for less money. But more importantly, you can buy an old smartphone for about 30 quid, which is going to absolutely destroy the image capabilities of this beast. Plus, you've got the added benefit of having a literal computer in that device. And I guess it has a home if you're looking to capture that old school camcorder looking footage, but you want it slightly modernized in an AVI codec. But the problem is the reliability issues. This thing just constantly turned off, it corrupted the files, it's prone to freeze, the zoom is fake, which doesn't even render it particularly useful for that specific niche. And if anyone is seriously buying it because they want a cheap camera, it's not offering you any of the functionalities that would typically garner buying a body. You can't do manual controls, you can't change the lenses. I just don't see the point in it. You might as well just get a smartphone and save yourself the money.